vibe.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky Varandas, and a great episode for you today. I'm going to keep this intro short because it's just a great guest. So why listen to me talk, right? Why do you want to hear me talk when I've been having such great guests on lately? And really, I've been very lucky because I've been able to check off some people off that bucket list of guests I've always wanted on. Ben Swan is one recently. Greg Pallas, somebody I've been a fan of for a long time. And today, G. Edward Griffin, somebody who's been a huge influence in the alternative media community, has been talking about the Federal Reserve, JFK, Big Pharma, and alternative treatments for illnesses for a long time. And somebody that, if you've been going down some rabbit holes, there's no way you haven't run into some of his lectures, you haven't run into some of his documentaries, or just heard his name because his work is always referenced in regards to the Creature from Jekyll Island, which is a huge influential book for many of us. And so it's been a real pleasure to have him on. First time in a long time I've been nervous before a show, I feel like, of late. So hopefully that doesn't shine through too much. But if you guys are a fan of the show, it's not uncommon for me to sound like an idiot from time to time and go on some long rants. So hopefully you guys accept that and you still find plenty of value and humor at times in the show. So like I said, I'll keep this short. Just remember, if you want to support the show, I do have a Patreon page. Anything you can give, $1, whatever it may be. But if you can't support the show, obviously, please share the show. Spread the show anywhere you want. The show is open source, so you can put it anywhere you would like, upload it, share it, tweet it, do whatever, and it all helps with just exposing these conversations to more people. So if you can't help the show financially, that's a great way of supporting the show. Just share it and review the show, tweet the show, thumbs up, subscribe to me wherever you're listening to these shows. Some people are still listening to these shows on YouTube, which is awesome because a lot of people call in using video so you can visually see the guests and I have the conversation, but it's more convenient to listen to it on a podcast app. So we are on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Podcast Addict is one of my favorite Android apps. And then we have another Union of the Unwanted show coming up on the 17th. So that's August 17th. I don't know when you're listening to this. So August 17th, Union of the Unwanted. We just grab people from the alternative media community, different researchers, different podcasters, different YouTubers, bring them together. We share our thoughts, talk about what's going on in the world, and kind of just bring interesting people, hoping to provoke interesting conversations. So people have really been enjoying that. They're live streamed every other Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So follow me on social media, RV36 on YouTube, RV36 on Instagram, RV36 on Parler or Parlay, however you pronounce it, RV36 on Instagram. I also have a Ripple Effect Podcast Facebook page, and I have a personal Facebook page, which is Ricky Varandas or Ricardo Varandas. And throw me a friend request if you'd like. Just let me know. Send me a message. Let me know that you're a fan of the podcast and it's not some spam or whatnot. So I think that's it. Shirts hopefully be out very soon. I just got an update today. They'll be out within hopefully a week or two. I think they're already in production. So I'm looking forward to having those and seeing them and selling them and seeing people with them. If you do send me a picture wearing it after, I'll post it on my Instagram or on my social media accounts or whatnot. So I think that's it, guys. Enjoy the conversation. We have plenty of great shows lined up, so I'm super excited about upcoming shows. But until then, enjoy this one, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. So it's been kind of a perfect example of this theory that I believe in. You know, this theory that you can start something, you never know what type of impact it's gonna create. And so I would have never guessed that, you know, a Portuguese immigrant who lives in Massachusetts would one day have a podcast that people want to listen to and have guests that are willing to want to come on, you know. But I think many of us, when we started, were probably very similar in thinking.
Yeah, perfect. That's the story of the story of mankind, actually. I think one of the stories. I think, yeah, most everybody in our movement has that origin. It's certainly true of me. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do, but it's kind of a philosophy built into that, and then you get to be really old, like I am, and you start thinking more philosophically than strategically. And I came to the conclusion once I started doing that, that the old question of everybody asks over and over again, why, what am I supposed to do? Why am I here? What's it all about, Alfie? And then I realized, oh, we know what it's all about because that's what we respond to. It's built into us. We don't have to read it. Nobody has to explain it to us. We feel it. And if we're smart, we just relax and go with it and see where the tide takes us. And instead of trying to, I'm a big believer in putting your paddle in the water and all of that and trying to overcome the cross currents. But basically, the big tide is beyond our control, and it's there for a reason. So that's my little 3 cents worth of philosophy this morning. But you brought all that up with what you said. Yeah, I agree.
Well,
totally.
yeah, well, I think, that's one thing I love about talking to people who are a little older, a little wiser, is they start asking those bigger questions more often. I think when you're young, you get so caught up into, you have you're high energy, you want to do something, but you probably don't spend enough time kind of gathering your thoughts and reflecting and trying to figure out those big questions. I mean, I'm not religious. I was raised Catholic. I was being Portuguese. It's common for us to be Catholic. And I kind of got out of it for a while. I got really intrigued with just the atheist perspective, because to me, it seemed like it made sense. Like, oh, I'm very skeptical. I ask a lot of questions. The atheists do that. And then little did I know, I just left one group to join another because they're just as extreme as the people that I thought were extreme. And but as I get older, and not that I'm old, but as I get older, I start appreciating my religious friends and spiritual friends and people who have something in their lives that provokes thought and provokes them to look at things maybe a little deeper and more than just surface things and material things. And I think we need that, right, as people.
I think we need it. We respond to it. It's part of that need that if we just relax and try not to figure it out, some of these things are beyond our understanding, I think. So once you get used to that idea and you're okay with the idea that you can't figure everything out and you can't know everything, then it gets to be quite comfortable. When you, like last night, went out on the deck and it was exceptionally clear, and I could see there's no number big enough to count the number of stars I could see. And of course, the Milky Way was very clear last night. And then I saw a shooting star, so-called shooting star. The meteors are supposed to start now, and I guess tonight will be the big night. And I was just in total wonder of all of the universe and all of the forces at play that are so far beyond my mere human understanding. And at one time, I would have been maybe kind of angry. How come I don't know? What's this all about? Come on, explain it to me. Now I'm very comfortable with knowing that I'm a piece of it, that it's okay that I don't know everything. It's as long as I know that what I'm supposed to be doing, I am doing. I don't have to understand it. I'm playing my role. It's a comforting feeling.
It reminds me of this metaphor I've said a lot on this show. I talk about how, I kind of feel, because some people, ignorance is bliss, right? They rather just kind of go along with the motions, not dig too deep, because maybe realizing that you don't understand things, or the world as you thought you knew it isn't exactly how it is, to them can be a little scary. And to some people, it's easier to kind of, say, hey, let me, ignorance is bliss. Let me just kind of go along with things the way I understand it. But to me, and I think to many of us in this movement, especially you who've been a huge in, red pilling a lot of people and giving people just unique perspectives. And to me, it's like every piece of information I gather is one more piece of the puzzle, and I say, like, life is a giant puzzle. It's all these puzzle pieces. There's millions and millions of puzzle pieces. And throughout my journey, my journey of life, I'm gathering puzzle pieces. Every time I figure something out, or every time I feel like I learn something about myself or the world around me, I'm gathering puzzle pieces. And like you said, there's something comforting to understanding that there's millions of puzzle pieces that I'm never going to gather them all. But I hope by the end of my journey, I'm going to have enough puzzle pieces where at least some of the images become a little bit clearer, So it's,
Sure. Yeah, it's a thrill to know that there is such a magnificent puzzle to start with. It's real. We don't understand it, but it's definitely real, whatever it is, and it's awesome. And to be part of that is quite interesting at first, and then it gets to be rewarding because you have, as I said before, if you go with the flow, so to speak, then you begin to feel like, I may be just a cog, but I'm a cog in something very important. So that's good.
Yeah,
of course, there's danger in that thinking because, as I can say, there's danger in that thinking because if you apply it to our lives today, some people are perfectly content to be just a cog in the state and in the collective and everything, and say, well, the individual isn't important, and that's certainly not where you want to go. Because, to me, being a cog is in the universe is not to imply that I'm an unimportant cog. It's to imply that every cog is important. And otherwise it wouldn't be there. So anyway, it's a caution because some people do enjoy not understanding the whole. I think there's a certain comfort in being in a corporation, a large corporation, or in the military. Yours is not to question why. Yours is to do or die. Don't question anything. Just follow orders and everything will be fine. Well, I think it may be necessary in a dire situation like warfare where you're fighting for your very life or the lives of your friends, your family, your community, and so forth. But as a pattern for life, it's disastrous. You'd have to be an individual to experience and to realize all the benefits of being a human being. You have to see yourself as an individual, not just part of the cog, a cog in the group. So enough of the philosophy. Are we on the air, by the way?
Yes. Well, I'll cut anything out you want to cut out, but I always record right when the call starts for the purpose of.
No, you don't need to cut anything out as far as I'm concerned. I didn't say anything that I'm embarrassed about. I might have thought a little more carefully before I said it, but other than that, I said everything I believed. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, well, for that exact purpose is why I always start recording, is because sometimes I get into really interesting conversations before the guest that thinks the show actually started. I'm like, well, This is useful. I think these are fun and thought-provoking conversations, and so I always record it just in case we end up getting into the conversation. We just keep it flowing or whatnot.
That's clever, and it's very efficient because I've found out over the years that in the days when I was doing a lot of documentaries and interviews, I found out that the minute you put a microphone in front of people and told them that the recorder was on, they kind of froze up and became overly self-conscious. But if they were talking without realizing that they were being recorded, it was so much better. So anyway, okay, so what are we going to talk about today? So I said, that's it. What are we going to talk about today?
Because what you said was so true, because it's the reason why I started doing it in this manner. And usually, I let them know. I send you a Skype message, but you probably didn't see it until afterwards. But I let people know. I'm like, hey, I'm going to start recording. I can cut it out afterwards, but I am going to start recording right when the show starts. I'm going to, for the purpose of keeping it casual and flowing. And it seems like started doing that, you start like you said, you start seeing it was much easier for the guests to get casual and comfortable in the conversation much quicker than me saying, hey, I'm going to start recording right now, just letting you know. And when I did that, it seemed like, okay, like you said, once you get a camera in front of somebody or a microphone in front of somebody, they know they're being recorded. As much as you want to believe I'm going to talk the exact same way, you don't, right?
No, you don't. No.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a half-baked amateur pianist. I've never taken any lessons. I can't read a note, but ever since I was a boy, I've had a piano in the house. It was owned by my aunt who raised me, my beautiful aunt that raised me. I came from a kind of a broken home, so she kind of rescued me, but she always had a piano. So as a little kid, I'd sit and tinker on it, and it's always been a joy to play the piano just for myself. But the minute somebody said, well, let me record that, oh no, I freeze up and nothing comes out that's worth anything. Not that it's worth anything to start with, but it gets even worser and worser when I know it's being recorded.
Well,
it's human nature.
Yeah, it is. Music's very interesting because same thing with myself. Like I never took a lesson. I mean, at one point I got interested in reading notes and reading music, and then I'm like, oh, this isn't really the reason why I got into music. I liked the idea of just kind of expressing my emotions,
Mhm.
hitting some chords or writing something that I felt like really how I felt and try to create music out of it. And to me, I mean, that's the interesting thing about music is there's always this debate, right? Like, okay, is it about being able to read notes? Is it about like the technical aspect of it? Or you throw that all away and is it really about how you feel? You know, how does it make you feel? And if a song that's very simply written and maybe very easy to play affects you in a way, hits a emotional chord, then to me that's much more important than the technical artist that does all these technical things, understands all of the everything about music, but yet can't write something that moves people. And that's a part of us being alive, about being human. I mean, emotions, feeling. This goes into our thinking, right? I mean, many of us who like to believe that we look at the facts and we make logical conclusions based on those facts. How little do they know that like they have many emotions, many biases, things that affected them in their upbringing that can affect the way they look at the world. And that's
Yeah.
why red pilling somebody, getting somebody to look at things from a different perspective, going against what they were initially taught, can be very hard for people.
Yeah. So it's quite an interesting journey, isn't it? This thing called life. Um, I'm glad that we're on board, aren't you? I mean, I'd hate to miss this trip.
Well,
Yeah, well,
especially
I know
now.
what you mean about getting a kick out of being creative. Now, what I'm going to say. It sounds like I'm poo-pooing people who don't consider themselves to be creative. I think everybody's creative, but many of us perhaps have never thought about giving it expression. I think there are a lot of creative people out there that think they're not creative, and therefore they don't do anything creative because they're sure that, well, that's not them. They're something else. I learned that lesson. Okay, so I'm a writer. I've made my living for quite a few years as a writer, and fortunately, people like what I write, and so I've been able to support my family pretty well, and it's a great kick to know that people actually want to read what I've written. But I wasn't always that way. I went through school studying communications and particularly television. Television was just coming on at that time when I was at the university, so they had a class in television production. So I took that, and then I went to work in a television station, and I became an assistant director. They called it a floor manager, just kind of a glorified cable puller. But I got deeply into television and all of that. And so I got the idea that, well, maybe I'm a creative person, but I didn't think I could write. Anytime anybody asked me to write something, I said, well, I don't know how to write. I never did. And then after I had a couple of kids, a beautiful wife and a couple of kids and a family to support, I became very, very ill. And I was misdiagnosed, fortunately, but two doctors said I had multiple sclerosis. And I thought, oh my God, that's the end of the line. And I was pretty paralyzed. I don't want to bore you with the story, but there is a point to it. And so I was sort of in bed. I couldn't get out of bed. I could hardly move. Sometimes I had trouble breathing. It's really a bad state of my life. I'm glad I went through it, by the way, because now I know a lot more about what life is about than I did otherwise. But anyway, so I'm lying there thinking, I'm running out of money. My family needs financial support. I can't even get out of bed, much less do anything to earn a living. And I had been giving speeches on the United Nations prior to that. So some uh, a producer, a publisher called me. He said, Ed, I hear you're kind of ill and in bed. I said, yeah, that's right. Well, could you do some writing for us? We need somebody to write a book on the United Nations, the topic that you've been speaking on. Would you like to do that? And it didn't take me very long. I'm thinking, I started to say, oh, I don't know how to write, but I found myself saying, oh, sure, that's no big deal. Yeah, no problem. Thinking to myself, how in the heck am I going to do that? I took it on. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes I think maybe that's the reason I got sick so badly and then recovered, is so that I would be forced to realize when I got into this project, not only could I write, but I enjoyed the heck out of it. I loved the research. I loved the formation of the ideas. I loved polishing the text so it flowed like poetry. If I could make it good, do that. I found myself. But had it not been for the hardships of life, so to speak, the big hits, the bangs and the bruises, I would never have known that I am what, quote, a creative person and all that sort of thing. So I mention that because I think there are a lot of people out there who are really creative and they don't even know it. And I hope they don't wait till they get a big bang over the head to force them to realize it. I think everybody should just take some time and just say, let me see what I can do with art or music or sculpture or whatever, writing or singing. I don't know. Try something and see what happens. I think they might be surprised.
Yeah, there's a study where they asked kids, really young kids, I don't know if it was like first grade, second grade, whatever it may be, and if they thought they were creative, and all the kids would raise their hand, and then as they get older, right, and
Yeah.
they were asking, and as you could probably assume, less kids were raising their hand, and this is something that you've discussed, and yeah, I have two beautiful kids too myself, so this is a big topic, especially now with homeschooling and all that stuff becoming something that was much more looked at like it was something weird or in the fringe, and now it's something that a lot of people are entertaining, people who would never have entertained the idea, and I think most kids are capable, if not all kids are capable of being creative. They are creative when they're kids, right? They paint, they draw, they play with blocks, they imagine things. And then what we did, we've created a world that says, hey, being creative gets you nowhere. So how about you just conform and just regurgitate names and dates and facts and all that stuff. And that's why you meet somebody who we call street smart. And what do we really mean? We mean that they have problem solving skills, they have critical thinking skills that maybe they didn't do good in school, which means they might have been bored or whatnot. I mean, I barely graduated high school. I thought I hated learning because that's what the school told me. They said I wasn't doing good in school because I must be a hands-on person. I must be somebody who needs to be sent to a vocational school. And then next thing you know, I'm watching documentaries, many with you in it or by you, and I'm listening to podcasts, and I'm like, wait, I love this stuff. I love learning. I guess the schools were wrong. It had nothing to do with me liking to learn. It had to do with the fact that they just didn't give me information in a manner that was thought-provoking or interesting.
Yeah, right. Well, that's it. I didn't know that I like to read either and research until I got into this field. And I thought, my gosh, there's a world out there I didn't know existed. So much more interesting when you read history from the point of view, well, especially if you read history from the words of the people in history. A lot of them left written records. You very seldom see their own words in the history books that we get in school. It's always some third person who's read them, possibly, but they're all about telling you what happened from the point of view of the historian, but never do they let you hear what the people living the history thought about the event. And when I first ran across that style of writing, the author's name was Harold Lamb. Harold Lamb is anybody that's looking for history that'll stimulate the spark of being interested in history. It's what did it for me. Harold Lamb's book on Tamerlane, which was Timur. Tamerlane, his real name was Timur the Great, and Theodora and the Empress of Rome and all. Man, you read the stuff. It's half of it at least is in the words, the diaries, the commentaries that were recorded of the people actually participating in these events, and you get all of a sudden you're standing there next to them, and you see what motivated them and the human drama that was involved and the decisions and the sacrifices and the agony and the joy. All of that stuff is stripped from history when you read it in a textbook. It's just about, well, the war started on this date, and the name of the emperor was, and he had 4,000 men in his army, and the Battle of Waterloo, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, all of the humanity is stripped out of history, in my view, in most of the history books. But if you go to the men who write history from the perspective of Harold Lamb, you get hooked on it. I guarantee you'll never watch Dancing with the Stars again.
Yeah, because I think it humanizes people, right? Instead of just it being there was this battle, there was this, there was that. You get to know the people, their motivations,
Yeah. Hmm.
the traumas, whatever was going on in their lives. And I think, when you get that deep into people and their stories, it becomes personal. It becomes you can relate to it. And I mean, like what you've done is you've had a huge influence on the way people look at the world. I mean, I went to the Red Pill Expo in Hartford this past year. I actually got to meet Richard Grove because through this podcast we became friends. He happened to live in Hartford. I'm like, well, I live in Massachusetts, Ludlow, Massachusetts. I'm like, I'm not too far from you, so we became friends. And then he invited me down there. It was awesome to see all the speakers, your event. But one thing that I thought was awesome too was like, you're there, you create this beautiful event, and there's all these people my age and younger who you're going to be an influence on our lives forever. I mean, you influence. There's a whole event with people that you influence, and that when you notice things like that, it reminds you how important it is to leave a legacy you're proud of, and to do something more, in your life if you can. And you've done that, and I think it's
Well, isn't that joyous? Isn't that fantastic? Because you're quite right. That's a great source of pleasure. But now we're back to our opening discussion, which is why are we here? What are we
yeah.
supposed to be doing? And I think you just nailed it there. What are we supposed to be doing? Well, in the biological sense, it's pretty clear that whatever we're supposed to be doing, we do. We don't have to read about it. We need to survive. Okay. That's the first thing we have to do as a biological creature. And boy, we have the survival instincts built into us. We have to procreate, otherwise the species goes out. Well, we don't have to discuss that very much. We know the urge, the desire, the drive, the knowledge of procreation is all built into us. So everything that we need to do biologically, we don't even have to think about it. It just happens. Now, what do we need to do mentally, spiritually, or psychologically, the other realm? I believe that's built into us just the same as the biological urges. And one of those urges is, you might say, to procreate ideas, because most of us learn things and we can hardly wait to share it with somebody, so that someone coming along, usually some younger person, it's like, hey, you don't have to make these same mistakes I did. Let me tell you about it. It's just built into us. So there you have it. It's why we're here, is to pass information along that is useful and beneficial for mankind. It's that simple.
Yeah. Well, I had a guest once called Idea Sex. It's like, let's create some idea sex. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. But another quote that you remind me of is, I think it's like, a smart person learns from their mistakes. A smarter person learns from somebody else's mistakes. And it's true, right? I mean, you don't have to actually experience something. It doesn't specifically have to happen to your life for you to learn from it. Learn from somebody else's experience.
Yeah.
Learn from somebody else's wisdom. And I think that's that's something I think people should learn to do, because you can learn a lot from people like yourself. I've had John Barber on. Abraham Bolden, which I'm sure you're familiar with the JFK assassination.
Mm-hmm.
When I had him on, I mean, what a great storyteller, and that for him to like share his experiences and his life, just wisdom that came from his life journey is just, to me, it's priceless, and to be able to record it and be able to kind of, I guess, stay online forever, hopefully, as long as we don't all get suppressed, because obviously that's a bigger and bigger issue now, is just censorship and all that stuff, which I definitely want to get into, because a lot of the stuff that you talked about, I mean, what amazes me, because I'm very big into health like yourself. I mean, you were talking about cancer in the 70s, alternative, how you can prevent it, how you can fight it, all this stuff. And now you look at it like the agenda of big pharma, the agenda of banks, I mean, globalism, like these are all things you've been talking about forever. And it seems like everything's being fast tracked, like it's happening faster than ever. I mean, from your perspective, what do you think is what's going on in the world? Do you have I know that's kind of a big question and broad question, but do you have like because everybody kind of has a slightly different perspective on like what they think is going on, or who they think is being the biggest influence on what's going on? Do you have you thought that out and have kind of a rough theory?
I've been thinking a lot about it. I don't know that means I thought it out, but I will. I think that's an important topic, and I would like to address it. But before doing that, I'd like to rewind to something you said a moment ago. about the easy way and the hard way to learn. The easy way, of course, is to read about it or listen to somebody explain it to you. The hard way is to experience the pain and the injury of it. Now, the rest of that story, though, is that people usually internalize the hard lessons much deeper than the ones they heard about or read about. And sometimes, even though they have the knowledge, it's not so intense, and they will often go against their better judgment because they haven't felt the pain yet of not doing so. They know it's wrong. They know it's filled with risk, and they know it's probably not going to turn out well, but they've never felt the pain. And that's unfortunate, but it's a fact of human nature. And so I'm thinking of that in terms of your later question, well, what's going on today and so forth. And I'm just wondering, this is a question now, not a conclusion, but a question. I'm just wondering if we know that the universe plays itself out in such a way that sometimes we are forced to do that which we're supposed to do by events such as my illness that I mentioned a moment ago. It was a horrible experience for me, but it turned out to be one of the greatest things for me. I'm so grateful for it because it caused me to make the correct decisions and go in the right direction later on. And I'm wondering if something like that is being played out right now, that people know what's the old saying? Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Okay, we've heard that. It's written on our plaques. It's on the wall. We see it splashed across our video screens every once in a while as we go flipping around. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. I've got a little rock on my desk at home that's painted with that. Okay, we all know it, but how many people have eternal vigilance? What we're going through right now, the collapse of society and the success of our collectivist opponents in destroying everything that we cherish so that they can rebuild and remold society and remold human beings. All of that is coming because we did not practice diligence. We did not prevent it from happening. So we did not have vigilance. We know that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, but did we practice eternal vigilance? No. We just sat back and we were willing to accept whatever we saw on our video screens, whatever it said in print in the New York Times, whatever the talking heads said, we went along. There's another part of human nature that's unfortunate, perhaps. Maybe it has some valuable aspects to it, but if we're a herd species, like cows. I mean, most mammals travel in herds or clans, and we go along with what our leaders tell us to do. We don't tend to question for ourselves. There's that part of us that gets us deeply into trouble. So we followed the herd part of our personality and ignored the warning that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We knew it, but we didn't follow it. So now we come to your question, what's going on? Well, what's going on today is that we didn't follow eternal vigilance, and everything that was in place and building, by the way, it didn't start off perfect, but it started off pretty good back in 1776, far from perfect, but it was getting better and better and better and better until finally this thing, collectivism, came along just about the time of World War I. Well, it really started with the French Revolution and all of that, but you don't have to forget all the ancient history, so to speak, and get to the modern world. World War I, World War II is when all of our principles of a free enterprise, individual-based society began to be attacked by people who thought that a collectivist system would be better, where the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual has to be sacrificed for the greater good of the greater number. All of that began to creep into our culture and into our educational system, into our textbooks, and finally into our entertainment, and finally into our thinking. So that today, I venture to say, probably 90% of the population really believes in the principles of collectivism. They may not know it. They probably never heard the word, or if they did, they're not quite sure what it means. But they do know what they've learned in school, which is that the group is important, more important than the individual, and the greater good of the greater number is the ultimate goal, and only the state is wise enough and dependable enough to know what the greater good for the greater number is, because they speak for the people and so forth. All of these slogans get involved, and nobody has any vigilance. They don't challenge the slogans. They don't ask, are you sure how that works out? So let me see, the group is more important than the individual. So democracy, oh yeah, that means the majority rules. That's good, doesn't it? That's good. Yeah, well, what is a lynch mob? There's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. Wait a minute. Is the majority always to be obeyed? And now we have to stop and think and start challenging some of these slogans and see, well, wait a minute. Is that just a slogan or is that a real principle? Well, all of these things, I'm kind of rambling, and I hope you'll forgive me for that, but I'm trying to get my own mind in frame for the answer to your final question, which is, well, what's going on today and where is it headed? I see what's going on today is we're coming to the crossroads. I mean, we've been approaching it rapidly for a long time, but now I think we're standing right there looking up at the signposts. And the signpost has two arrows on it. And it says, this way to slavery and compliance and complacency and naivety and this and comfort. Well, not comfort, but no decision required. Just obey. Everything's taken care of. That's collectivism. And this way to individualism, where you've got to think for yourself, you've got to question authority, especially question authority. You've got to be willing to go against the majority if necessary, if it's based on principle, if it involves the rights of a human being, one individual. The human rights of one individual is supreme to all of the other rights of a group of people, of a million people. Just because it's a mathematical superiority doesn't mean it's a superiority in principle. The whole purpose of a just society is to protect each individual against the passion and the greed and the ignorance and the avarice of the majority. The majority is always what destroys society in the modern world. And people have to understand that if the majority isn't controlled, and then all we need is just to wait for some demagogue to come along and whip up the passions of the majority and say those people over there are too rich, or they're too white, or they're too religious, or they're too nationalistic, or whatever it is. We hate them. They don't have any rights. We are the majority, and so forth. And that's how we got into the mess we're in. It's because we've allowed these concepts of collectivism to dominate our thinking, and let these people who are trying to destroy the old system get away with the trick of telling us that they are on the high ground morally. They're always talking about shame on you for this and shame on you for that. And those are the people who are at the dredges, at the bottom, with no principles, no ethics whatsoever, practicing the morality of warfare, the ethics of warfare. In war, there's only one unethical, only one immoral act, and that's to lose. And that's what they believe. So they will practice anything. They will lie, cheat, steal, murder, rape. They'll deceive, they'll commit genocide, they'll do anything as long as they can say, well, it was for the greater good of the greater number. That's what's destroying society. And now once we get the bigger picture, then we can see how it plays out in all of these separate little fields and eddy currents. It's all the same thing underneath. It's the destruction of individualism in society and the replacement of that with collectivism in such a way so that the masses of the people, the sleeping masses, will approve of it. And they say, well, I don't like it, but I guess it's okay because it's for my own good, they think, because it's for the greater good of the greater number. Now, that's how I would answer your question. And we got to look at the foundation flow of the lava first, and then we can see what the train is going to look like after the lava cools down.
Yeah, one thing you said, which I think is so important, people use terms like democracy. Oh yeah, we live in a democracy, like it's this great theory and idea, and people just repeat stuff without actually even knowing what they mean or questioning them. I mean, there's this great quote, democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. And it's like, okay, well, if you have one sheep and two wolves, democracy wins, right? It means that the two wolves decide they can eat the sheep. Does that mean democracy is always right?
Well, yeah, in their minds it is, because it's for the greater good of the greater number. Too bad about the sheep. Now, the trouble is that we're all sheep, in that sense. We're all individuals, and we're going to be outnumbered at some point in our lives, or at some point in the day, actually. And we're always outnumbered by some group that we happen to be in. So as long as we think that, well, if numbers are the only thing we need to look at, man, we're in deep trouble. And that's why they like to dumb us down in the schools. They don't want us to know about these principles or to think about. They certainly don't want us to read the great writings of the people in the past that have written on these very deep topics. And that's why our schools are really, well, they're training camps for our enemy, our collectivist enemy. I learned all this in school. I had to unlearn much of what I'm talking about here because I had picked it up in school. Even back in my day, it was pretty clear. Yeah, I was taught all that stuff. And today, it's just, I don't know how the kids survive in school today at all. It's just incredible, the propaganda they get and the way their options are limited. They're only presented with half of an argument. And I don't care how smart someone is, or a kid or an adult. I don't care how smart they are. I don't care how expensive and how much memory and how much speed is in a computer. If you feed wrong information into it, that computer is going to come up with wrong conclusions, just like a smart person is going to come up with wrong opinions if they only have half of the data to draw from.
That's such an important point. This is why the censorship issue has become so important to me, because you look at, I've had Del Bigtree on. He got pulled off YouTube. His documentary Vax has been pulled. I've had the filmmakers from the documentary called The Big Secret, which is all about how, basically how medicine, how homeopathic medicine and functional medicine. Oop, did you lose me for a second? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, you sort of broke in and out, but I hear you.
Sorry. Yeah. But The Big Secret was a great documentary about how homeopathic medicine, the history of homeopathic medicine, and how basically chemical medicines became the only thing that we can consider medicine now. Things that are made from pharmaceutical drugs, pharmaceutical companies. Before, teas, root extracts, nutrition, food, all this stuff wasn't looked down upon as pseudoscience like it is now. And all this stuff is so important. And you look at it now, it almost seems like a lot of what they're doing now is opening people's minds to these other, I guess, conspiracy theories, for lack of a better term, things that they were interested in. Because you look at like the vaccine conversation before, a lot of people who wouldn't even question, taking a vaccine or question vaccines in general are now much more open to the idea that maybe they're harmful. Maybe they should think twice about it. Maybe, but like you said, the biggest problem is like getting those alternative perspectives. Because the way I look at it, my kids aren't vaccinated. I have a beautiful, almost 4-year-old daughter, 5-year-old son. I love them both. Neither of them have any vaccines. Cognitively, they're awesome. No health issues whatsoever. Not allergic to anything whatsoever. They're examples of how I think kids should be and how they could be if they're not filled with all this unnatural stuff and having their bodies do unnatural things. And but to me, it's people are much more open to this, and parents, even if they are curious in the idea of like, well, you know what? This whole vaccine debate, let me look at the other side. Let me see what they're saying. You don't even have access to that information anymore. And like you said, if you don't have access to all the information, and you have somebody controlling the information and controlling, what truth is, they're saying, hey, we decided what truth is, and only our version of it are you able to research and see. Then, like you said, then the outcome's going to, your decision making is going to be based on that, which means if you have crappy information, you're going to have a crappy outcome and decision making, right?
Well, I think the evidence of that is that the smartest people, I guess maybe this is an overstatement, but in general, I think the smartest people in society are entrapped by the propaganda, because they're the ones that go to the universities and they're exposed to intense propaganda. I mean, professionally intense propaganda for 4, 6, 8. It depends on how many years they want to stay in academia, and they're so programmed like a computer with information that, as we both are saying, it's just half of the story, and they never are allowed to hear the other half unless it's presented in such a way that, oh, let's take a look at this now, how ridiculous this is. And so they're exposed to sometimes to the correct information, but in a way that it biases their ability to appraise it. For example, a personal example, I have never put anything up on Wikipedia for my biography. Others have done it. But I found out later that my biography on Wikipedia became a great source of controversy between editors at Wikipedia. Some of the editors who didn't know me from beans discovered that my biography was always being salted with phrases like conspiracy theorist, for example. And they said, well, yeah, plenty of conspiracy theories. A good thing to label them as such. But then they read my books. And then they said, well, wait a minute, this guy's not a conspiracy theorist. So there was a big big debate still going on, by the way, on Wikipedia, not just over me, but anybody in the field of alternative health. And they're all classified as wackos and conspiracy theorists because there are trolls, not only outside of Wikipedia, but some of them even on the editorial staff inside Wikipedia, people who are paid by the pharmaceutical company to do nothing day and night, but to monitor anything that goes up on Wikipedia dealing with health and nutrition. And the minute anyone starts talking about nutrition as having some advantage or some natural remedy, an herbal or something, they're immediately taken down or reclassified as conspiracy theorists or false information, things like that. So people need to know this. And back to where I started a few minutes ago when I went off in my orbit on the big picture. Maybe because in my life and in the lives of so many other people I know, that the best things that happened to them were a result of great conflict and calamities, or what seemed like a calamity at the time. Maybe, just maybe, what we are going through today in society is a bigger version of the same thing. Maybe it's going to take this kind of real confrontation and pain and destruction of the economy and people being out of work and old folks needlessly dying because they're not being given the medical care they should, or they're being put on ventilators, which kill a lot of old people in the name of treating their coronavirus. Maybe all of these things that are now coming out are necessary so that the sleeping public, the sleeping masses, could be jolted out of their complacency and say, wait a minute, what the heck is going on here? Maybe that's the natural cycle appearing before our very eyes, that we're going to go through some real hard times, but out of it will come an awakening to the fact that we cannot trust these authorities who claim to speak on our behalf.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I just had Ben Swan on not too long ago, and he was talking about how he kept saying how they overplay their hand, and I tend to agree with you. I mean, like I said previously, a lot of people who never even thought about homeschooling, thought that it was this crazy thing to do, are now asking questions about it and asking me questions about it. And I did a show at the end of last year about unschooling with Carrie McDonald, and I was sending that to people and telling people, hey, look into this. A lot of people who weren't interested in that episode before are like, you know what, I don't want to send my kids to school. What's my options? And same thing with the pharmaceutical companies. It's like we all kind of agreed that pharmaceutical companies are corrupt, they're criminals, they put out stuff that is FDA approved, which doesn't mean much, and that harm people, but yet a lot of those people still wouldn't go into the vaccine conversation, and now they're much more open to that. Even the cancer thing, you were talking about trolls. I had Dr. Brzezinski on probably like the first couple months I started the show, like 6-7 years ago. So I had no platform, barely anybody was listening. I was actually quite surprised that he even was willing to come on, and he came on, and immediately I started right when I announced that he was coming on, I was getting trolls on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere, just kind of saying he's pseudoscience, he's this, and I'm like, who are you and how did you find my show? I just started doing this. And
yeah.
And it was obvious that it was like you said, it seems crazy, but it's without a doubt, there are people that their full-time job was to discredit him. That's all it was, and they were trying to discredit him.
Well, the one of the things I learned from this experience is because I did talk with one of the editors at Wikipedia, and I've been trying to convince her to write a book on all this. But anyway, for now, she's still thinking about it. But she, where was I going with that? The business about the trolls. Oh, I know where I was going. She said that she said that every major corporation and institution in the world has employees who are paid to do nothing but monitor and adjust the Wikipedia reviews so that they will not be in disharmony with the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, that happened recently with the pandemic documentary. Dr. Judy her Wikipedia page got locked. They said that she was a anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist. Ben Swan had a similar experience when he started. I don't know if it was when he was talking about vaccines or when he did a little video on Pizzagate. He got completely just, his Wikipedia page got locked. You had all these people discrediting them. It's scary because health is one of the most important things to me, because the only way you're going to have energy to go protest, the only way you're going to have energy to read, write, do something active, if you feel good and cognitively, and physically. And to me, that's why like the health issue is so important to me. The mandated vaccine issue is so important to me. Because it's like, if we don't have our health, if we don't have our physical and mental health, then what else do we have? We can't fight back if we want to fight back.
Well, I agree with that totally, and that's why I think that health and liberty are the two cornerstones of our existence. Which one can you live without? If you have great health but no liberty, there you are. You're a slave. If you're free but you're walking around in a walker and breathing oxygen, or can't hardly talk, and you always are in pain, what good is freedom, So yeah, those are two aspects of human nature that we need desperately to experience humanity.
Yeah. I had Dr. Thomas Seyfried on, who he has like 150 peer-reviewed studies about how the ketogenic diet can fight and prevent cancer, because we understand how the glucose feeds cancer cells. And it seems like it's just typical, pretty, logical understanding that, hey, if we know that cancer feeds off sugar, if we remove sugar from our diet, we can possibly prevent it or fight it. And nobody's interested. And story after story like this, I had Jim Abrams on from who did are you familiar with like the Naked Gun movies, those silly movies from back in the day, and Airplane and all that stuff? They're just funny comedy movies. But he had an issue with his son, and he's doing great work with the Charlie Foundation. He had an issue with his son. His son was having really violent seizures, and he had money, resources, could go to all the best doctors in the world, could cut in line at hospitals to talk to doctors to try to resolve this issue. And it was just medication after medication, surgeries that did nothing. And one day he runs into this research at Johns Hopkins that they did that showed that if you put your child, well, they were having some success with the ketogenic diet and preventing or getting rid of these seizures. And what was going on is that once you put your body in ketosis, your body can burn fat for energy. And one of the issues with some of these seizures are that your body can't use glucose for energy. It can't use sugar for energy. So you're giving it the other energy source. And he cured his son of this, in days, got off all the pharmaceutical drugs. And he was very upset because he's like, I don't get it. I talked to my doctors. Nobody once suggested this dietary therapy that worked. And even if they thought it didn't work, or if there's even a small potential of it working, why wasn't this even suggested? And then he started a foundation called the Charlie Foundation to look into it and kind of promote it and whatnot. But, this is somebody who had the best doctors, had money, resources, and yet not one person even suggested this. And this is a perfect example of how we like to put doctors on this pedestal that, like, hey, if they're not suggesting something, it's because it doesn't work, And I think that's a huge problem.
We're back to the statement I made before, is that sometimes the greatest brains, the smartest people in the world are the most programmed, because they're subjected to it for a longer period than anybody else. I mean, these doctors, what do they spend 7 years in medical school? What do they get? The same thing every day. Well, of course, they're going to come out totally without any contrary information about dietary, the impact of that on natural health. Most doctors will admit, and the studies show, that the average doctor's wife knows more about nutrition than he does, because they don't teach it. I've had a lot of doctors tell me, they said, well, yeah, we had one course on nutrition in all my 8 years there, or 7 or whatever it was, one course. And we just learned about vitamin C, vitamin A, and all the stuff that you can learn in a high school textbook. That's it. And all the rest is chemicals, drugs, pharmaceutical, the interaction, how we can interrupt the normal functioning of the body to mask some kind of a symptom. And we don't care what kind of problems that creates, because we got another drug to take care of that one. And on and on and on it goes. It's a huge, it's a river of gold that just flows constantly into the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, and this goes back to the Flexer report
Yeah.
you know, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. I mean, it's amazing how these families had influence on everything. And you know, you see it now with Bill Gates. James Corbett did a great documentary on Bill Gates recently. And I mean, he seems like our version, or you know, my generation's version of the Rockefellers, because he's the same way, where he has influence on so many health organizations. He gives money to BBC, he gives money to NPR, he gives money to all. It's like he has his hands everywhere, and
Well,
yet
the
he's
World
not a
Health
doc.
Organization, he funds the World Health Organization. And as you said, the CDC, well, what more? You've got it locked up there because those are the two sources that everyone turns to for objective, scientific, reliable information. And it's all coming from Bill Gates.
Yeah, absolutely. And and then you look at another perfect example of them overplaying the cards. Bill Gates, if I talked to a common person about him 2 years ago or a year ago or even 6 months ago, people are like, oh, that's just a conspiracy theorist. But a lot of people are now becoming much more aware of his eugenics roots, his depopulation comments and whatnot. And so in a way, like you said, it almost seems like a addict who has to hit rock bottom before he can get his life together. You know, it's like the
That's about it.
society.
I'm afraid that's true. I hope it's not, but I have a feeling that's the truth that's unfolding.
So is it fair to say that you're optimistic, even though it seems like we're that addict hitting rock bottom with a bottle of Jack Daniels in our hand? We're gonna eventually put it down, and we're gonna come out of this maybe in a better society.
Yeah, well, let me be very clear on that. I'm not saying, and I do not believe that I believe that we will come out of this good. What I believe is that we can, and that's a big step forward, because the only other belief is that we cannot. I don't believe that at all. I think it depends on what we do, but that does not mean that there isn't hell to pay. I mean, when an addict comes back off of his addiction, he goes through withdrawal. It's a painful experience. I'm glad I never had to go through that. But I had to give up smoking, and I had to give up coffee every day and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, for a real hardcore addiction, it must be all hell on earth. Well, for an addict to do that, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be painful or that's going to be easy. All you got to do is say, "Oh, I quit." No. So we have to pull out of an addiction in a way. It's a good analogy, and it's not going to be easy. If anybody thinks that all we got to do is just vote for the right person at the next election and everything will be fine, they're not living in a world of reality. There's going to be a price to pay, and we're paying it right now. Right now, we're paying that price. I mean, how many people are out of work, and how many people now are getting to be totally dependent on the government just to have money in their pocket? If you would ask them 6 months ago or a year ago, how do you feel about a guaranteed national income? 90% of the people said, "No, you're crazy. That would never work." And now everybody's waiting in line for it, because it's coming from the government and they need it. They lost their jobs. So you see, all of this thing is pushing people into a situation where there's no easy way back. There is no easy way back. I mean, we're in the pit right now, and it's going to get worse. Now, having said all that, and I think we have to be realistic, that doesn't mean that we're doomed forever. It just simply means that the road back is going to be difficult. But I can see the road back. And what you and I are doing right now are laying the foundation for the next generation to find its way back, because it's going to be rubble. I'm afraid it's going to be rubble. But there is a path back. And if we can leave the blueprint, if we can make the blueprint and put the markers along the way and say, this is where the road goes. You don't turn here, you turn over there. And this is why. If we can leave all of that, I am very optimistic for the long picture. And that's all we can hope for. It's not going to happen in one generation. We didn't lose our freedoms in one generation. It's been a generational thing. It really started in World War I. We started giving up our liberties and giving up our wealth because we were fighting a war against a terrible enemy. Fear has always been the primary weapon used against people, for them to willingly give up their liberty and their wealth because they're afraid of something. And if the government can come along and say, "Look how terrible this is, now you just give us more power and more taxes and we'll protect you," that works every time, every time. It's been working ever since World War I. So we've been losing our liberties and paying more and more of our wealth in taxes and inflation to the state, which in many cases is the very entity that caused the problem in the first place. So we lost our liberties over, 50 years or more. It's a generational thing. We can't regain it at the next election. It's a cultural thing. And the new generation has to rediscover old truths. And that's why we're here. The point I'm trying to make is that, is it going to be easy? No, it's going to be hard. But is it possible? Yes, it's definitely possible if we do our job. And every night when I go to bed, I have a little smile on my face thinking, boy, that was a tough day, but I got one more brick in place for the structure. One more brick. And it's going to work. I can see it coming. It's in the future, but that foundation is getting bigger and bigger every day. And it's a great source of satisfaction.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're seeing people look for alternatives to social media. You're seeing people start. I mean, I've had so many people who want to start podcasts now just because they're so motivated by what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, whatever you want to do. I'm like, if you want to, if you're spreading truth or seeking truth, because I guess truth is subjective. But if you're seeking truth, which I think is much more important than, I guess, everybody, like you said, being collective and deciding what truth is, then spread those ideas, spread those conversations. We can all do our part. I mean, one thing that is a little scary about people in the alternative media world right now, and I'm glad you kind of hit on it when you were talking, is the fact that so many people think that if they just vote Trump back in, then everything's going to be okay. And it's like you're seeing a lot of people in the alternative media community falling for this thing that they think a president's going to, he's gonna change things, or he's locking up all the pedophiles. He's the one who's, and it's like we get tricked every 4 years. I'm like, how many years are you gonna get tricked? And then he's not gonna do the job, and then you're gonna think the next guy's gonna do a job. Then you think the next guy's gonna do a job. And when do you get to the point that you're like, hey, none of these guys are the answer?
Well, that's our job. And that's one of the main messages we have to communicate, is that partisan politics is not the solution. In fact, it's part of the problem. That's really part of the problem, because if people are going to fall for the trick that if I just am in the right group, in the right party, then I don't have to do anything. I just have to vote for my candidate that's on my party ticket and send some money in. Maybe I'll send $20 in this year, and then it's all done. And I can speak out. I'll tell, this is, the Republicans are good, the Democrats are bad, or the other way around. It sometimes switches back and forth. If I can just say, I voted, that's another thing. That gives them a good feeling of great accomplishment. I voted. I voted for people that were chosen by other people that I don't know who they are and so forth, but I voted. It's part of the propaganda to make you feel that that's all you have to do is vote. No, that isn't all you have to do. You have to get out there and spread the word. You have to learn about what are the fundamentals of liberty. What is freedom? What does it come from? What does it require? Can you have freedom at the same time as telling people what to think and what not to think and what to do and what not to do? Can you really say you're a freedom advocate and you're all for centering people on anything? Do you want to center the left? Do you want to center the right because you're for freedom? No, you don't believe in censorship at all. And it's hard for people to get, you don't believe from stealing from some people and giving to others? No, I don't believe in that. But do you believe in Social Security? Oh, yeah, I believe in that. No, they don't understand the principles. They're working on slogans. So until that day comes, it's going to be a hard road back. But it's coming. That's the point. It's coming. And I can see it now. I can't tell you how pleasant it is. More and more, when I'm listening to even mainstream broadcasts, I hear the word collectivist or collectivism used more and more and more. That's the word, People didn't know the word before, and now they're beginning to use it. Instead of saying, well, they're socialists or they're communists or they're Nazis or they're fascists, which are the usual vindictives, now they say, well, they're collectivists. And bingo, I found there's another person that understands what's really going on. And that's happening more and more and more. So we're on the way. And back to your question. Am I optimistic? No. Am I happy? Am I enthusiastic? Yes, I'm very enthusiastic about the progress that's being made. So count me in. I'm in the battle to the end.
And you know what? You're motivating a lot of people who are also helping with the battle, and I think that's that's super important because there's that's why I say even something as simple as conversation. People sometimes are like, well, what can I do? What am I? What I'm like, even if you're just sparking conversation, even if you're just recommending a book, your books have influenced many people, including myself. You never know what the red pill moment's going to be. When is going to be that moment that finally they're like, you know what, like, uh, the way I looked at the world was wrong, and we're all chipping away at that. If we all contribute a little bit by having these conversations, by not being afraid to, because that's the other thing too is, and I've said this on the podcast many of times, how we're told never to bring up politics or religion at a dinner table, but it's completely okay to argue and be at each other's throats over sports. And I'm like, wait, I don't get it. So the conversations that are important, like the
Yeah.
conversations that we should be discussing, the bigger questions we can't talk about. But the things that aren't important, we can argue till the cows come home, and nobody has a problem with that. It's like, it almost seems like a great technique to get us to not talk about the more important things and discuss ideas and the more important questions. So
I have a theory. I have a theory on that, and of course, I have several theories on it. So it depends on what time of the day you ask me, I suppose. But right now, at this hour on this day, my theory on that is that the primary reason people don't like to talk or don't want to talk about religion or politics or sex, those are the three taboos, I guess. There are more, but those are the three big ones, is because they can't defend their position. They have feelings, but they cannot justify their feelings. And so they don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing when somebody says, well, why do you feel that way? And they can't tell you that because they don't know. It's just something they picked up along the way. And so they've internalized it and they know it's right. That's how they feel. And so therefore, and they can't defend it. So therefore they don't want to talk about it. That's my opinion on that topic at this moment.
Well, it's funny because I think writing, and when I used to write music a lot or write lyrics and poetry, and I'm sure from your years of writing, I feel like it helps with that, right? It helps with like actually putting, because you think, like you said, sometimes you think like, okay, I stand like on this specific issue, this is where I stand, this is my opinion. And when somebody challenges that or somebody asks you to explain it, you realize like, I haven't really thought that out. But when you write, it forces you to think it out. It forces you to gather your thoughts and figure out, okay, where do I stand? Why do I think these things? Because I think to me, like that's a question that people don't ask enough, and it's super important. Like, where's the root of your opinions and ideas and perspectives? Like, is it just, like you said, influenced by emotion? Is it influenced by actual, I guess, thinking about it and having internal dilemmas and deciding, okay, where do I stand on this? Like, I don't think people have those internal conversations.
No, they don't. And the big issues, especially, they don't because they inherit them. When they're born into a culture, they're there. They have them by the time they can think. They've already got these attitudes, not because they thought them through, but because they were handed to them and they absorbed them from the people around them. I mean, there's no better proof of that. Just go to any country in the world where there's a different religion dominant. All the people, not all, but 90% of the people in that geographical area are devoted advocates of that religion. Is that because they all think differently in that continent or something? No, it's because they were born into it. And so they accept it as truth because their parents and their group, their peers all agree. And therefore it's sort of like groupthink. And they never think it through. It's just you have to accept it because it's true. It's a true. And that's a kind of a problem where we come to culture and traditions. Everybody's very proud of their traditions, and I think rightfully so. But I've read some interesting essays recently that challenge that belief. I'm still that way, but I suddenly realized that if you have traditions that you are handed and you haven't thought them through like we're discussing, it's just that's tradition, and then you defend it because it's tradition, well, there's something wrong with that. Maybe you need to go back and look at it at least before you start defending it because it's tradition. And so I'm in the midst right now, possibly, of making a subtle shift in my attitudes toward tradition. I'm sure that there are places in the world that there are traditions that you and I would be horrified about. I mean, horrified. primitive societies, we would call them, or they would look at our society and say we're primitive because of our traditions and so forth. I mean, just take circumcision comes to mind all of a sudden. That's a tradition. Why do we do this? I don't know. I have to read more on that one. But I mean, there are all kinds of traditions that we just accept, and we cherish them because they're traditions and they're wrapped up in our emotional connection to the past and our founding fathers, and all of that is good. I think when we have traditions like we do, where it's a tradition of liberty, of breaking away from a tyranny, and to the extent to which that narrative is accurate, and not all of it is accurate, by the way, in my view, but most of it is, to the extent that that narrative is accurate, we should revere those traditions. But the extent to which something in any tradition is based on either a falsehood or maybe is based on something that is not good in our personal judgment, then I think we have to say, well, in this case, I think we need to change the tradition. And anyway, we're off on another topic, but the world is full of little eddy currents of thoughts like that. Sometimes we are surprised. I am surprised by the fact that, oh, there's a tradition or a view I've had for a long, long time, and somebody asked me why, and I went blank, you know. I thought I had this all figured out. Not so. I don't think we ever figure all these things out. I don't care if we live to be 10,000 years old, we'll be discovering these little eddy currents of our own beliefs.
Yeah, and that's actually why I kind of have a show like I have. I don't do like a typical interview. I try to have a casual conversation because a lot of times things will get brought up that you never really thought about, and then you go down that road, and next thing you know, you're sharing ideas and perspectives, and you're kind of figuring it out while you're having the conversation. And to me, that's so important. I think that's the power of conversation. I think that's why podcasts and documentaries and anything that has like long form discussions is important, because sometimes it takes time to kind of gather your thoughts. If we only had a 10-minute conversation, it'd be much different than if we have an hour conversation, because we're going to go down some roads that we never would have went down if we only had a 10-minute conversation. Yeah. And it leads you to and to me, that's why I always say, like, this show isn't just a journey for myself, but it's or not just for the listeners, but it's for myself too. Like, when I have these conversations, I'm figuring things out, I'm learning, I'm trying to figure out how I feel on certain things and whatnot. So it really what makes it fun. And so in a way, it's like I'm trying to do something good for the world, right? But there's a little bit of selfishness of like, well, I'm getting something out of this too. I'm growing with the listeners while this is happening. But another thing you said about the norms, I think one thing that's a little scary, like you said, like culture. If your culture says if this is the way you grow up and this is what you see, and somebody's told you this is a normal, you can accept anything. Like circumcision is a perfect example, because my son, I didn't circumcise him, and my wife's like, why don't you want to? And I'm like, well, why do you want to? And
yeah.
She didn't have
what kind of a question is that?
Exactly.
So I don't know why, but everybody does it. So
exactly. And I think that you see that with just privacy, right? For example, like if a kid is raised today in a world where they're used to their phone listening to them, to knowing that Google, YouTube, Twitter, everybody's tracking you, that becomes their norm, and I think people like us who kind of got to see the analog world, grew up in the analog world, and see the transition to the digital world, we almost have to grab them and shake them and be like, hey, this world that you've accepted as normal, like this isn't normal, and you being listened to, and you being watched, and you being having zero privacy isn't a world that you have to accept as normal. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes people are raised in this culture of the NSA listening to everything you're doing, having zero privacy, and to them, they accept it because to them it's normal. And that's why I think we need these conversations to remind people that, like, hey, if somebody went to your mailbox and opened every single piece of mail, made a photocopy and put it back in your mailbox, you wouldn't accept that. So why the hell do you accept, Google, YouTube, NSA, everybody else, CIA, to get access to all your personal information, and people don't seem to be upset about it. They almost seem like they accepted it as a everyday life.
Well, I might interrupt if I could on that point. You made an assumption that maybe isn't true, and the assumption is that if they opened up everybody's mail and photocopied it and sealed it up again, that everybody would object. Maybe they would do that only for a month, And after a month, it would be normal. And then they wouldn't. I remember almost everything that we find so horrendous today. When it first came out, everybody was up in arms about it. The first thing comes to mind right now is this national ID. We're never going to have national ID under no circumstances. And some of the states backed off. Well, now we've got it, and it's normal now. I mean, you have to get it. And nobody's questioning it now because everybody got it off their chest, so to speak, a couple of years ago. When we first heard that these smart things, these smartphones, that they were going to be able to track us. What? No way. I'm not going to put up with that. And everybody was up in arms over the smartphone tracking us. Why? Or listening to our conversations? No way. It'll never happen. They'll never let it happen. And I'm so sick and tired of every time something like that comes up and it's in the press. Here's what it said. So-and-so is planning to expand the power of state surveillance in some way. And then the next line is privacy critics are greatly concerned at this move. And that's it. That next line is always in there. Somebody expressed concern, and then that's the end of it. And I guess most people read that and say, oh, well, somebody's on it. They're not going to let that happen because, look, it says right there in the newspaper that there's concern over it. What do they care about the concern? Before they do it, they know there's going to be concern over it. They plan these things like the military does. They know what the enemy's going to do, what their counteraction is going to be, and then they plan to counteract the counteraction. It's all mapped out. So of course they know there's going to be opposition. When barcodes first came out, no way am I going to go through a grocery store with a barcode reader on it. It's just not going to happen. That's outrageous. Everything is always followed by the sentence that privacy experts are concerned over this move. I'm so sick and I'm tired of hearing that because most people will say, oh, yeah, so somebody's on it. They're not going to let it happen. Those experts who are concerned probably are going to take care of us. Oh, man, it's part of the scenario. That's all.
Well, you see it with the Jeffrey Epstein thing. I mean, we've been talking about, a lot of people in alternative media have been talking about child trafficking, the elites being linked to pedophilia, all this stuff, and it seemed crazy. And then when the story finally, broke out in the mainstream media, because it's been in the alternative media forever, but people were upset. Oh my God, he's linked to Trump, he's linked to Clinton, he's linked to Alan Dershowitz, he's linked to Bill Gates, all this stuff, and it's like out of nowhere, nobody's outraged anymore. And I'm like, do you realize we're talking about children being raped by the elite in science? In the elite in news, the elite in Hollywood, the elite everywhere is linked to all this, and everybody's just okay with it. So it's a perfect example of even like what if you said to somebody, "What's the worst thing somebody could do?" I mean, there'd be nothing worse than pedophilia, and yet that's even acceptable.
Yeah, it maybe not acceptable, but it's something no longer to talk about. That's yesterday's news. It's no longer important. Anyway, those are the problems, and we've got a lot of things to fix, but we're on the job, and that's what's important. Think about it. Nobody's been on the job until recently. I mean, I've been on the job, so to speak, since 1960, but there was never any international movement. There was never anybody or any group that focused on this idea of collectivism versus individualism. There was nobody concerned with the idea of building some kind of an international movement to go against collectivism and attack it at the ideological base rather than the political base. By the time you're dealing with it at the political level, it's over. But how did those politicians get in there in the first place? What lies and what promises did they make? How did they even get into Congress so they could come up with laws like that? It's over by the time you're dealing with a law that's been proposed. How did those people get into Congress? What was their rhetoric? How did the people fall for that? How did they vote them in? Things like that. And why shouldn't they have? Maybe there are a lot of good people even listening to this program that still think that these slogans that we're hearing that promote the destruction of America, if they really believe that all cops are racist, for example, that they may actually believe that. Well, you got a problem there because you talk about a disconnect. How can you phrase it? All cops are racist, but only police should have guns. I mean, this is a disconnect. And if we don't attack this war and this battle on the basis of the disconnect of ideas first, then we can't win when it finally gets into political action. So So we're on the job for the first time. And I'd just like to close, if I can, by inviting anybody that wants to be part of this to come and see what we're creating at redpilluniversity.org. Now, Red Pill University sounds kind of bland, but let me assure you, is it serious, really serious, boots on the ground. We'll have campuses in all of the counties in the United States, and we also will have them overseas as well. This is a global movement. So anyway, come to redpilluniversity.org, check it out, and come on board if you want to make a difference, because the battle has begun.
And are you still doing the Red Pill Expo this year in Jekyll Island?
Well, it's still on the books, but it looks like we're going to have to pull the plug on it. Not because we want to, but who knows what the airlines will do. I mean, right now the airlines are talking about you got to have this passport or a vaccine, or I don't know. People aren't going to come. So that's not going to work. But we will have it online. And by the time it comes up the next cycle, maybe we will have beaten back enough of this insanity that we can have a live event somewhere. But we're not going to quit. We're just going to change our venue. And we may have actually a much bigger event online, but I want people to get together and meet each other eyeball to eyeball, not hiding behind masks or inside their houses so they can't talk to each other and form alliances and coalitions. That's why they want people in their houses, is so they can't do anything. They can't get together and start a movement to oppose it. We're going to fight that all the way. And that's what our campuses are about. So, yeah, to your question, we're probably going to have to pull the plug out, probably make that decision in the next few days. But that doesn't mean we've given up on the event at all. We're just going to change its venue.
Yeah, that's one thing I loved about the Red Pill Expo, was just seeing so many cool people that I'm a fan of coming together, talking. I ran into James Perloff, who, was from Massachusetts there. Got to talk to him, got to talk to so many people who've been on my show. So it was just cool to see everybody kind of gather and everybody know that, like, hey, we're on the same team. We might have slightly different opinions on certain things, but we're all fighting the same people. And that's what's important, and I
Well, yeah, and what you're talking about is well described. If anybody is wondering about Red Pill University, what's that all about? When you go to the site, be sure to click on the emblem up there in the top right-hand corner that says, take the tour. It's really important to read that page first, because it goes through all of the truly unique elements of this movement that it's never happened before. And the idea of coming together and getting to meet people on a personal basis and form personal alliances. And you don't really get to trust somebody till you've had dinner with them or several coffees, or you hung out with them and joked around and found out what kind of a person they are. Is this a person who's sincere? Have they got problems hidden? And so forth. That nothing happens until you can meet people and learn to trust them personally. Then you can get things done. And that's part of the strategy.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I think people love about the podcast, a long form conversation. Somebody can fake being a nice, sincere person for 5-10 minutes, but an hour later, you have a pretty good idea of who they are, or at least a much better idea. Okay, this person's. Yeah. So, but I can't thank you enough for coming on and taking the time to just chat with me about everything and anything. I know this probably isn't your typical, interview, because I kind of just talk about a little bit of everything, but hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Oh, I did.
And,
yeah.
And keep up the great work. I'll obviously be keeping up with everything you're doing, and hopefully be another Red Pill Expo in the future.
Okay, very good. Thanks much, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey,
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.